one of my favorite people. I get this really special honor tonight of being able to introduce Susan, and I'm just so excited about it. When I first met Susan in 2017, I was just like really impressed by the fact that she had moved to New Orleans on her own and later in life. That just seemed like such a courageous thing to do. And I envied her this like perpetual optimism and ability to be able to perceive other people in a really favorable light. That's something I don't do really well, but she does it so well. And I also recognized something about the way that Susan held her body. There was a way in which her shoulders kind of caved in a way that seemed so protective of her. And I learned pretty quickly that she had just recently lost the love of her life, her husband, John. I had also had a big loss around that time, so I could identify with that need to protect oneself. I remember a time not long after I met Susan when we were sitting around a table with a group of other women. And Susan was just absolutely delighting in sharing stories with us about John. And she told us this one story where he was on this really tiny bicycle and he was a big guy. And he's coming through the fog. And as she's telling the story, Susan is just like, she's got to stop and collect herself because she is laughing so hard, and so are all the rest of us. And by the end of the story, we can see John so clearly coming toward us like a clown on a bike, honking the little horn. Susan has lived on and around sailboats for more than 30 years, and in between sails, she earned a BA at Barnard and an MA at Columbia. And for many years, she ran a successful market research firm in New York. Her essays have appeared in literary journals and sailing magazines. Susan was born in Cleveland, Ohio. She's lived in New York, Connecticut, Florida, and Mexico, and now she lives here. Holding Fast, a memoir of love, sailing, and loss, is Susan's first book. It's her gorgeously captured story of leaving everything behind to follow her husband's lifelong dream and sailing away. Many people, I think most of us in this room, have had some kind of dream about leaving on a life-changing adventure, but Susan actually did. When Susan lights and memories with John, she shows us how love underlying John's loss is so much bigger than the loss itself. She also shows us how she can take her love for what she's lost and turn it into something beautiful. She turns it into art. Holding Fast is certainly a gripping story and an inspirational memoir. But it's also this really great opportunity for us, the reader, to be able to see how she and John created such a big, big love. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Well, thank you so much, Charlie. I think I'm going to stand because I don't know if you guys can see me behind this table here. So I want to thank you all for coming. It's so nice to see each and every one of you in this room. Many faces that I know, some that I don't. Also, it's being live streamed, so some friends and relatives are listening who don't live here. And I want to especially mention my daughter, Kate, who is one of the main characters in the book and who has some New Orleans friends that are in the room here. And her husband, Alex, my son-in-law, who was instrumental in me finishing this book. He's just a great manager, and he's kind of like my manager for getting things done. And my stepdaughter, Reagan, who lives in Maine, is a wonderful artist, and she agreed to do this beautiful map of our voyage, which is in the front of the book. And it's also great to see some people here from Symphony Book Fair, where I volunteer, which is a great organization that I'm very happy to be part of. So this is my first book. This is my first book launch, book signing. I wanted to write. I have written since I was a child and wanted to be a writer and read a lot. I'm now in my 70s and my book is happening. So don't give up on your dreams. That's the message there. Now, what it's about, Charlie gave you an overview of it. It's about a couple, myself and my late husband, John, who set out with their young daughter on a voyage. John and I met on a long voyage. John and I met in our 20s. We met at work, both married to the wrong people. And we, after a few years, we got together, had a hot and heavy affair that lasted 44 years. And he loved the water. He loved sailing. I was from Ohio, had never been on a boat, but I really enjoyed sailing with him. And he always dreamed of sailing away. We lived when we were in our 20s and 30s. We lived on old leaky, romantic wooden boats in Long Island Sound. And his dream, stayed steady. We then got a house. We had a daughter, and when she was 7, we left. And I didn't want to go. I loved living in Connecticut. By that point, we were in our 40s. We had careers, but I went because I knew how important it was to him. And the voyage lasted 3 years. My attitude initially was, okay, he can do all the hard stuff. He can this is his idea, his dream. He can do all the tough sailing stuff. By the end of the 3 years, we were in Guatemala on the Rio Dulce, a jungle river, way up the river on our boat. John was away. He was on a business trip. And Hurricane Mitch, which at that time this was in the late 90s when we took this voyage. At that time, it was the strongest hurricane on record. And I handled the boat. It was me, my daughter, and the dog. And that was not something I would ever have imagined myself doing. John he pushed himself out of his comfort zone, and he really pushed the rest of us, especially me, out of my comfort zone. Subsequently, many years later, after he passed away, I moved to New Orleans, knowing nobody except my daughter. She lived here at the time. And so many wonderful and surprising things have happened to me here that I wouldn't have anticipated. My life, at this point in my life. And I looking back, I know that those early, and our wild and crazy voyage and our early experiences really have helped me. So I would like to read to you from the book. I'd like to read the first chapter and also one of the subsequent chapters when we're off sailing. And I'll read just a portion of it. So, I'm not reading all night or something. And here it is. Okay. So I'm going to read the epigraph. No, I'd never been to this country before. No, I didn't know where the roads would lead me. No, I didn't intend to turn back. That's by Mary Oliver from Felicity. Chapter 1, Underway. We still lived in Connecticut. That Saturday, my husband John and I took our 7-year-old daughter Kate to Mystic Seaport. As we reached the town of white picket fences and tidy window boxes of petunias, geraniums, and zinnias, John turned to Kate and said, "In a few weeks, we're going to move on Laughing Goat and go sailing." I sprang to attention in the back. We had discussed breaking the news to Kate, but I hadn't known when John would do it. He waited until we came under the spell of the tall ships and recreated 19th century village, where blacksmiths and carpenters plied their trades. As usual, John took his time, raising a cigarette to his lips, inhaling, flicking ash in a tiny metal tray, flashing again at me, and waiting for Kate's response. Though the smell of his cigarette smoke no longer intoxicated me as it had 20 years ago, I still loved the sensual curve of John's hand around a cigarette. John was 6 when his family moved to Africa. Before they went, his mother told him about lions and tigers and elephants and snakes, anthills as big as houses, and the wild bush that would surround their new house where he could play. He couldn't wait to go. He wanted to impart a similar excitement to Kate about our voyage. "Where are we going?" Kate asked. "South, first to Florida. Then we'll figure out where we want to go from there, somewhere in the Caribbean. We'll snorkel. There are fantastic coral reefs like nothing you've ever seen. What about school? You and Mom will do it on the boat. What about our house? We're rented out." Kate glanced at me. Passing the schooners on Mystic River, I could imagine sailing down the intracoastal waterway through charming towns like those on Long Island Sound. "It'll be fun," I said, feeling like Judas. I didn't share my doubts and fears. Kate told her class the next day that she was sailing to the Caribbean and snorkeling, and she wasn't going to school anymore. Her teacher, a sailor, was thrilled for her and asked her to write the class about her adventures. She promised they would write back. I wish it had been that simple for me. I did not want to go. John would tease me and say, "I'll have to drag you out kicking and screaming, clinging to the garden." I imagined myself red-faced and shrieking, my fingers black with dirt, while John yanked on my legs and Kate stared open-mouthed. I was not a person who yelled. John wasn't either. In our 20s, vacationing in Isla Mujeres, Mexico, I was surprised when one of the locals with whom we convivially joked at a bar described us as the quiet couple. There was so much feeling between us that we never felt quiet to me. From the outside, though, we appeared so. We, us. When we fell in love, I glommed onto John as though he would save my life. He glommed onto me, too, as a way out of roles that smothered. Husband and father at 18, John Jr. to his dad's John Sr., the inherited mantle of a family who sailed to America on the Mayflower. The youngest of 4 with 3 older sisters, he was irresponsible John in his family, a party boy and artist in high school who beat to his own drum. I, too, was a baby in my family, arriving 9 years after my sister and 11 after my brother. A much unexpected, unplanned 3rd child. The 4 were already a family, locked in one argument after another, instigated by my volatile mother. My dad was the only one who lit up when I came into her room. I learned to stay under the radar, to feel out the temperature before I ventured a word. In audio tapes my mother recorded of our family dinners, mine was the high voice piping up, "Shut up and listen." My dad died of heart disease when I was 10, and I was lost until I met John. John and I lived in our house in Fairfield for nearly 10 years, and Kate had lived there her whole life. Before that, John and I lived on old wooden boats in Long Island Sound for 15 years. On the water, we had no address. Our address on land, 425 Brookside Drive, sounded so solid, a red farmhouse on a hill alongside the Mill River and a nature conservancy from which deer would thunder out of early morning mists. At first, I would repeat the address over and over, pinching myself as I wandered through the house and polished hardwood floors and flung open the tall casement windows. I wasn't ready to give the house up to live out John's dream of sailing off. As we sailed, the house became a beacon for me. The cozy red house on a hill, lights twinkling from the windows, river gurgling, the smell of wild strawberries drifting through the air, and a tattered tire swing suspended from a maple tree that Kate and her friends swung on over the stream, waiting for our return. Now, many years later, John has passed away, and the voyage occupies a space in my mind as bright as the lights of Havana when we drifted outside the harbor, waiting for daylight to enter. but I can no longer ask him what he thinks it all meant. I'm now going to do from chapter 16, which is from Havana to Isla Mujeres, Mexico. And there is a reference in there to XL, which is the ferry boat that John and I lived on in our 20s. We sailed west through the Gulf of Mexico, about 10 miles from the Cuban coastline, skirting the strong Yucatan current flowing against us, northeast from the Western Caribbean toward the Atlantic. This would be our longest passage, 325 miles. As night fell, the lights of Cuba glowed in the distance. 8-foot waves and 25-knot winds out of the north pushed us along. We were far enough out in the ocean that the waves were steady and rolling, not choppy as they would be in shallower water near shore. Yet they hit us uncomfortably on the beam. I put meals together one-handed, while holding fast to the handholds in the galley with the other as we clanged up and down the waves, sails snapping, boom banging, shrouds clanking, loose cabinet doors thumping. This was very different from the light winds and flat seas on the way to Nassau, when I sautéed steak and we ate chocolate under the stars. By the time I cleaned up, I could hardly remember what we ate. The rain came and went. Kate stayed up for part of John's watch the first night out. Kate and Elmo had become John's watch buddies. As I awoke to join him, John was explaining about the cloud cover to her before she drifted off to sleep below. No moon showed a bright path on the water, nor did stars cascade softly out of the night sky. As we sailed further out, the lights of Cuba disappeared. John and I stared upwards at the black shape of each wave heading toward us out of the blackness. The wave would blot out the amorphous darkness beyond, suspended for a moment like it was preparing to attack, before whooshing under the boat. We would quickly glance at each other and then watch transfixed. The laughing boat slid down the back of the wave. Then the next wave would tower up in front of us. Without the blue sky and water as a backdrop, there was no scale, nothing to measure them against. They looked like mountains. At the top of the wave, one of us would grab the binoculars, stand up, and swivel around 360 degrees to look for ships. We had 15 seconds until the boat began its downward plunge. Once we were in the trough, waves blocked the view. The first time I saw a ship in the distance, I stuttered with excitement and shoved the binoculars over to John to confirm the sighting. He had to wait until the boat took the next wave to sneak a glimpse. Peering through the binoculars, John tried to identify the navigation lights in the few seconds before dropping beneath the wave. Red for port, green for starboard, or white, which meant we were seeing the bow or stern. In the rush, it was hard to determine. What is it? I bounced in the seat as John peered. It's a cruise ship. What's it doing? What's happening? As the waves tumbled underneath us, sprayed droplets, and lifted us up again, we tried to figure it out. A cruise ship ablaze with light now shared a square of the Gulf with Laughing Goat. The ships traveled 4 or 5 times faster than Laughing Goat. If it was headed in our direction or crossing our path, it would look bigger with each view. When Laughing Goat surfed to the top of the wave, we both sprang to our feet, exchanging the binoculars again. What do you think? I asked. We kept staring in the ship's direction while in the trough. It might be crossing us. Let's alter course to be safe and aim for the ship's stern. John adjusted the autopilot a couple of degrees. Twice, we convinced ourselves that the ship was aiming straight for us. Eventually, we believed it was heading south toward the Yucatan Straits, maybe for Cozumel, and was way ahead of us. We came back on course, somewhat embarrassed by our overreaction. When John went below, though, and I was on watch by myself, a breathless, hysterical refrain would run through my head. I'm in the middle of the ocean, the middle of the ocean. I would ignore the solidity of the boat under me, as though I were bobbing directly in the sea and disaster could strike from any direction. I had to force myself to calm down as the boat steadfastly took one wave, then the next, one at a time, up and down, up and down. For a second, I would imagine myself as Captain Jack Aubrey, the larger-than-life sea captain from Patrick O'Brien's historical novels, lustily steering through North Sea storms, or Naomi James, the New Zealand sailor who made lines in 1978, sailing around the world by herself in her 20s. Then the tiniest change, a wind shift, something in the distance I couldn't identify, would set off the hysterical refrain again. I usually didn't last for more than 10 minutes before calling John. John would bound up the companionway stairs, and without a word, my tension eased. Maybe he would squeeze my shoulder, hand me a soft drink to share, or just lay down and doze. His presence slowed my heartbeat, unhinged my shoulders, and smoothed my forehead. Once, when we lived on XL, a couple who lived on a rowed sailboat on our dock in Stamford, Connecticut, invited us on a trip to Martha's Vineyard. After we accepted, John had to go on a business trip. Excited to sail on such a lovely boat, John and I figured out that if we timed it right, John could fly to Block Island and join us there. I set out alone with the couple, whom we did not know well. After we anchored the first night, they started drinking, and innocuous comments escalated into a nasty fight. As I watched from the sidelines, the husband, an ex-military man, raced below for his gun, which he waved around in the cockpit, threatening his wife that if she didn't shut up, he'd shoot her. "Shoot me," she cried. I don't remember if I froze in fear, screamed aloud, or both. Eventually, they fell asleep. By the time we sailed into Block Island the next day, I was ready to disembark and head home. I fell on John and whispered to him what had happened, but by then, the couple had made up. John stepped aboard and we continued the trip. I never sailed without John after that. I thought I might stop there. So I'm open to any questions, and I did, and I hope you do have some questions. And I also brought along one of our yacht logs. We kept these while we were on the voyage, and that's really what I wrote the book from, because every page will say, where we left from, where we got to, and very often it's crossed out because we didn't make where we were supposed to get to. So there's something else written in. And all of our comments, and particularly because John is gone now, it's his voice. Kate and I contributed as well, but I just love reading it, and it just smells like Laughing Goat to me, the boat. So, and I also remember faxes? I had a lot of faxes that we wrote. But yeah, does anybody I hope somebody has a question. Oh, Bob.
How big was the boat?
What?
How big was the boat?
Oh, the boat was 43 feet. It was called a Mason 43, and it was a flag blue hull. It's all described in the book, but and it had a teak deck and had lots of beautiful wood rails, wood hatch, and below it had teak and mahogany. It was really a beautiful boat. It had when we were looking for a boat, we wanted to be sure, because we knew we were doing a long voyage, that we had a separate space from Kate, so we could each have our privacy. So her cabin was the forward cabin. She had a V berth, like they come to a V at the bow, and it was pretty big though. And she had shelves for books and tons of stuffed animals. And then our cabin was at the aft section, and then there was a main cabin, a galley for cooking, and a navigation station for charging. Now, Kate, with her cabin, she had the idea, I can't remember where she first read about it or something, but of, a boat crashing. The first part of the boat to crash is the bow. It crashes into the rocks so she began to call her cabin the death cabin. So, she had the death cabin. But yeah, but it's 43 feet. We wanted something. We were looking for something.
Kate is actually watching at home, and she said the Titanic.
Oh, the Titanic. The movie came out at that time. Yeah.
So why the Laughing Goat?
Oh, well, we were. John worked for a large advertising agency, and I also worked. I had a market research business, but I did a lot of work with advertising. So we wanted something that was memorable, a name that was memorable, and we spent a weekend brainstorming, and we came up with a combination of Laughing, which is a famous sailboat race. Was a large racing sailboat. John used to follow the sailboat races, and the Laughing Gull and the old goat that John felt he was becoming, because he really wanted to leave years before we left. He felt it's time to go, time to leave. So Yeah, so that's where that name's from. Lisa.
So what did Kate think of the voyage while it was happening, and how does she look back on it?
Oh, I wonder if she'll answer us, but the way I see it might be different. Well, at the time, let's see, she refused to speak any Spanish. We were in all Spanish-speaking countries. She wanted all American kind of stuff, and she thought it was very third world, kind of a third world. No malls. There were no malls. But I think she really enjoyed the adventure part of it. Like we would be at, say on the Rio Dulce, that was a place where a lot of boats spent hurricane season. So other families that were doing what we were doing were there, from France, from New Zealand. It was just so interesting to meet and everybody had a different schooling system they were using. So the kids would all hang out together, and they were all so, this is one thing that I know John especially, but I loved it as well. Just the self-reliance that the kids got. They were running around in the dinghies. Kate was 9 and she could operate our dinghy and pick up her friends, and they'd go play. And on the beach, they might find shards of Mayan artifacts. Like little. I guess we should have turned them in. But it was just that part was really wonderful. The part that was hard and that was lonely for her was when there were no kids, and it was before the internet, so we couldn't. These days, families who are doing this can communicate on the internet and we'll meet you at this island. We didn't have that option, so we were always so happy to find other kids. Yeah. So I guess she didn't. Did she?
She has not answered yet. I did type it in just in case you couldn't hear me. So we'll
but when she looks back on it, on our way back after the 3 years, even with this, the fact that it was hard for her not to have other kids around, and John and I completely understood that, and that's really why we came back. But even on the way back, all of us were feeling how we were going to lose so much freedom. We had so much freedom on the trip. And we sailed back into Key West. We step on the dock, and there's this long sign, dogs leashed, no bare feet. It just all this thing, no. And we had just been sailing without guideposts. We'd been riding horses next to volcanoes, again with no guideposts. Maybe it wasn't the safest thing, but there was just such a feeling of freedom on the voyage that was wonderful.
Thank you.
Tom?
When it wasn't too rough out and you were offshore, did you fall in love with the night sky?
Oh, yes. When it was really beautiful out, there was one sail. It was off of Belize. That was just so incredible. It was just a beautiful, clear, starry night, and it felt like you could see a mile up, and just all this, and you could see shooting stars. Just looking up, you just would see them shooting, and just thousands of them. It was incredible, and the air even had kind of a glow to it, even though it was 2 a.m. or something. And that was the night John and I were on watch, and we saw some lights like way in the distance. We weren't sure what they were, so we're trying to identify them. Our usual anxiety about lights that we can't figure out. And they were just, they were jumping all over the place. They just didn't look like boat lights or anything. And we just finally concluded that it had to be something like a UFO. And we were that area we have read is actually known for that. So it was it just felt almost believable at that time because everything was so magical that night. But yeah, I did love that.
Kate says you nailed it.
Third world sailing. Yeah. Tom?
Not to get too technical, how did you fix your position when you were way out in the middle of nowhere? Did you have Loran or something like that?
No. We had paper charts. We had a very rudimentary GPS. But it could take a position. but nothing else. It wasn't like now there's a chart plotter. Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah. But there were areas where the charts were, like in Mexico, at least at that time, maybe it's better now, but the charts were wrong. The lighthouse, we'd be looking at the lighthouse and we'd be sailing, we had to go through a reef to enter a harbor, and you'd have to be in a certain angle to the lighthouse. So we're looking at the lighthouse and we can see that it's not in the same position as on the chart. So yeah, there were some places at that time anyway that we couldn't use the charts. So, oh, Lisa?
Did you ever run into any pirates or hear other families running into pirates?
We never did, but we did. Yes, there was a family we met. This guy, he was a trial lawyer from Oregon. He had a giant catamaran, so he could never fit in any of the marinas there. And he'd never sailed. So he hired a captain, and to keep his wife and daughter happy, he brought along his mother-in-law and his daughter's best friend and her family. So they're all sailing. And they were off of Nicaragua, which was known for pirates. Because there were areas that were like, that you knew that there were pirates, like sailors would talk about it. So we just didn't sail there. But anyway, he was there, and what appeared to be a fishing boat came near him, and these guys were all just standing on the upper deck, and they called him, and he said, well, what do you want? And he sent everybody else below, and eventually he was a lawyer. He was able to talk him into just taking a case of beer. At the time, he was scared. He was threatening,
Yeah.
So, yeah, they had guns. That was the other thing. Yeah. So there was somebody back there. Yes. Oh, Phyllis.
How did you handle homeschooling, boat schooling, in an atmosphere where you and Kate couldn't ever get away from each other?
Well, yeah. Before we left, all the other moms were saying to me, oh, this is such a wonderful opportunity for you and Kate to bond. It's just going to be so great. So we get out there, and Kate loves to read and write. She's great at that. She loved, geography and mythology. That was all fine, but she hated math, and that is not my good subject either. So it started right at the beginning that we would just have these math fights, and it just would erupt, and sometimes it would get heated enough that John would try. He might be steering the boat or something, and he'd try to intervene. And we didn't want his intervention. This was like our fight. So it continued throughout the voyage. And what would happen is that we came home during hurricane season for about 6 weeks or so every summer. And she would just cram like the rest of third grade in, just do one lesson after the other. But we were not great about daily lessons and being real disciplined about it. But there was one time when, this is after probably 2.5 years of the 3-year voyage, when she was 4th grade at this point, and she just would not, instead of doing fractions, she was like drawing a hangman and making little drawings and, looking at the rash on my face or, just anything. And I just finally got so upset that I slammed the math book on the table and I said, I don't care if you never get out of 4th grade. And then I come down and she's writing a friend, and she signed her letter, 4th grade forever. So that's our schooling experience. Other people seem to have different experiences.
How did she do integrating back into school?
Oh, that was so hard. That was really hard. We came back to Florida and we researched schools. And we decided to go to Florida because it was warm. John didn't want to go back up north anymore and compete in New York anymore, that kind of thing. So, okay. So we thought, well, a small school, she hasn't been in school for a while. So we go to this small school where it turned out she's the only new student, the only new fifth grader, which was the last year of the lower school. And so we got to the first day, and she had a very lovely teacher. Kate was asked to introduce herself, and they asked where she was from because she was new, and she said, "I'm from nowhere." So her teacher was telling me this, and we're both like, you know. I said, "You think that Kate would want to tell the class everywhere she's been?" I said, "Well, I don't know. She really wants to fit in, you know." And then Kate was she thought the kids were babies because she was riding the dinghy. It just happened where we were was an interior suburb. We didn't live there, but that's where the school was, and the parents were very protective, and the kids didn't even cross the street by themselves. And she said, "Oh, they're babies," but they also didn't want to eat lunch with her. So it was very hard that first year back. We changed schools, and that got better. Yeah. Oh, Yvonne?
When you reluctantly agreed to finally go, did you have a timeline? We're going for a year, we're going for 10 months, whatever, and then did you stick to that? Or how did you
Yeah.
talk about it?
We didn't have a timeline. We just decided if we thought when we left, we thought, well, if we hated it, we would definitely come back within a year, you know. But beyond that, we would just see what happened. And I remember when we left, and we were very close to John's sister and brother-in-law who lived in Connecticut, and we were saying our goodbyes. You know, we stopped by, and Fred, my brother-in-law, was in the Navy, and he could not understand that we didn't know where we were going. Oh, we're going south, you know, because we knew we would have. It was winter. We would have to go down the intercoastal waterway. We didn't have the experience to go on the Atlantic, and we didn't want to go in the winter storms. So we knew at least that's what we were doing initially, and then we were going offshore. But we, you know, weren't aware that we'd read a lot and we had some ideas. So no, we didn't have John was really he was he would have hated to have a timeline. That wouldn't have worked. Tom?
I think I remember Kate talking about, you know, when you were in a harbor and there were other cruisers, that there was like a society of boat kids.
Yes. It was. I thought it was just the greatest thing. They would they would all be so happy to see each other, and they'd watch movies on each other's boats. And we didn't have TV, but all of us, or most of us, had movies. But you know, we only had each boat had their little set of movies. So each kid like knew every line of every movie that they had on the boat. But then they could have the other kids over to watch their movies. Yeah, they would, you know, do school in the mornings and play in the afternoons. And it was also interesting, the cultural differences. Like there was one family who was British, and they had two kids that Kate played with. And they were just such a nice family, and so they'd done a ton of sailing. They were playing some game like some Trivial Pursuit or whatever those games are. And anyway, the answer, Kate was convinced that this answer was pants, and the two British children were saying trousers, and they were each convinced that they were correct. And the parents, it was just amusing. The kids didn't find it amusing, but the parents just did. You know, just the cultural differences that would come up. Yeah. Jake?
Did you research the places you stopped at, or was it just charts and you went there?
We researched, but we would usually we developed a plan. Like we came back the first year we sailed through the Bahamas, and the next year we developed a plan that we wanted to go to the Rio Dulce, which we had read about for 20 years, and it's really gorgeous. It's like it's a very narrow jungle gorge that you're sailing through with monkeys and red-tailed hawks and flowers, and you're just sailing through it. So we knew that was our destination. We thought of places to stop, like Isla Mujeres, where we had all traveled before, and Belize we'd never been to, so we thought that would be interesting. So we had kind of a general And then we would ask, then usually there'd be people in the ports who had already been to those places, so we could ask about it. Yeah. Lorraine?
Yes, were you working at the time? I mean, you're running your business and flying off, or?
Yeah, we both were. For the first year, we were, I would say, more than the subsequent years. But like when we were in the Bahamas, 1 week I would stay with Kate and John would be off in New York for a project. And then the next week, he would be with Kate there and I would be off. We were really loved the boating life, and we're feeling like this was interfering with our cruising, but on the other hand, we could be cruising. So yeah, but we did continue working. But as we got further, it just became harder because we'd have to take a canoe to a puddle jumper to a larger place. Yeah, well, we continued sporadically working. John was hoping we wouldn't have to work anymore. That we came back in around 2000, just before that, 1999, just before the 2000 crash. So he was hoping that we could just live on our stock market earnings, which didn't work out. Yeah. So anything else anyone wants to ask?
I have a writing question.
Oh,
So your details are so vivid in the book, and I'm wondering, do you have those all noted, or did you, when you're writing it, does it just bring it all back to you? Like the sounds on the boat when you're getting smashed with the waves, and the visuals going in and out of harbors and people and stuff.
if there's something that well, I can't find anything immediately, but it's in there. Some of it is in there so that I could tell how we felt, especially if it was some miserable sail, of which there were many, But I found, and what was so wonderful for me in writing the book, especially with John gone now, is I could just be there and I could be writing about it, and it was like I was there. And I almost felt like, like he was in another room. So, yeah, it's not, it just kind of triggers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jackie?
I don't know quite how to ask this as a question, but in one of the reviews from someone who was part of the sailing community, he was saying that you don't often hear stories of people sailing from the woman's point of view.
Yeah.
And were you conscious of that, or would you like to speak to that at all?
Oh yeah. When I was getting ready for the trip, it was hard for me to find books by women about cruising, and the ones I did would be more like recipes and stuff like that. But which is fun too. I mean, we all exchange recipes and stuff, but just the experience of it, and for me, the conflicts of it, I hadn't really read anything like that. And most of the books I see that are about sailing are very heroic, conquered that storm. And in ours, I do deal with the fears that we had. We left, I mean, we had no experience sailing in the dark, and we were terrified of sailing in the dark. So, so I that was something that that I hadn't seen dealt with that much. Teresa?
I'm amazed that there is even a question I have left to ask you after. But as you started to tinker with the boat and help repair the boat, you came, well, obviously you didn't have sailing experience, so you really didn't have any experience with the inner workings of the boat, but didn't you end up repairing the bilge pump and all that kind of stuff. How did John show you how to do that, or did you figure it out, or?
Well, when we were together in our 20s, we lived on this rotten old romantic ferry boat. And all we did was repair that boat. So I began to learn about repairs actually when we were, before Laughing Goat. Laughing Goat was the first really sound boat we had. The previous XL, the ferry boat sank. We raised her, but sold it. And then the next boat nearly sank. And on the next boat, we literally replaced, it was an oak wooden boat. We literally replaced like a whole side plank on the side. So, I mean, and I helped. So I wound up learning by doing it. So, yeah. Bob?
Where did Laughing Goat end up?
Oh, it was so sad. We came back and we lived on the boat for the first year back. Then we got a house and we sold the boat. And it was really hard to sell the boat. I mean, we loved this boat so much and it was beautiful. But it just, that particular time, the early 2000s, whatever, it took us about a year and a half. We finally sold it to this guy and we could just, I mean, dealing with him was so difficult and we could just kind of, it wasn't a good feeling that we had, but it was the only offer. So we did sell it to him. And we learned like a few years later that it was on the hard in, up somewhere in the Carolinas and had not been cared for. And that just made us so sad because we took such good care of the boat. So.
Was it new, Susan?
Oh no. No. Never had a new boat. It was we left in 96 and we bought it, I think it was 93. And it was from 1982. So it was about 10 years old. We bought it. In very good shape. Well, if no one has questions, I'm happy to sign any books if anybody would like me to sign them. Thank you all so much. Those are great questions. My glasses.
I just happen to have 2 copies here.
Everybody gets a book. I have these bookmarks. These beautiful
Good.
bookmarks.
That's really nice.
Yes.
This one is from my mom.
So, do you want me to just sign my name, or should I say something?
Michelle, looking forward to meeting you. Something like that, because I do want y'all to meet.
Okay. So 2 L's?
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. She sure does.
Should I sign both names?
Okay. Plants against the patriarchy. Smoking the magical all sorts
I know that
of
was here. I
plants.
didn't know what it is.
That's hilarious.
I know.
Thank you.
This is for you.
This is such a pretty bookmark. I love it.
Thank you. I love it too. I'm so happy how it came out.
I love the artwork on it. Oh, look, Luke's quote is on the